All right, welcome back for our last video of the week, part 5 of Introduction to IEP Goals and Evidence-Based Practices. All right, so last week I had you write your initial thoughts on evidence-based practices. So one of the questions was, what is an evidence-based practice or program? And then how can education professionals identify and select evidence-based practices and programs? And so that was what you did last week. So what I want you to do is to pull that out. And for number 9 of your document for participation that you're going to submit on Canvas, I want you to do a learning revision. Look at it then, and then look at what you've learned since doing the IRIS module and what you know now. So look back at your initial thoughts from the evidence-based practice module and tell me what is one or more things you would change about your original understanding of evidence-based practices. Again, this is a quick write, and so I'm going to pull up those questions so that you can see them. So I want you to stop the video, respond to the change in your learning, the revisions in your learning, and then when you're finished, come back and we'll talk more about evidence-based practices. Let me say this. I should have said this. Make sure if you have not done the module yet, go ahead and write number 9 in the question, and then make sure that you come back and answer it after you do the module, okay? Don't forget to come back. Don't forget to come back to make sure it's there. All right, so go ahead and stop your video, and here are the questions from the IRIS module. All right. So you already know some about, if you've done your module. If not, this will be an introduction to evidence-based practices. If you have done your module, this will be some review. So let's talk about evidence-based practices. What are they? Well, like I said before, they are practices that there has been rigorous research done on these practices. And the outcomes, the findings of that research have demonstrated that whatever this practice is, has positive outcomes, has positive student outcomes, and that is an improvement in their learning, okay? So it's rigorous. I want you to think about that. It's not just any research, it's rigorous research. And it's multiple studies. It's not just one. There are some guidelines about how you identify a practice as being evidence-based. So there has to be repeated studies. It has to be rigorous. It has to be conducted by different research teams, for examples. So here are some key features of an evidence-based practice. It is supported by research. It has a positive impact on students' learning, and it can be replicated in similar contexts. So, for example, if they have done research studies, they've done multiple research studies, it was replicated. The positive outcome, we implemented this practice with fidelity the way it was supposed to be implemented. It had a positive impact on student learning. Now, the next study, we replicated it, it had positive impact. So it's been repeated. Not only that, it can be replicated in your classroom as long as that practice is an evidence-based practice for what you're teaching and the population and the context. So you wouldn't necessarily, an evidence-based practice for a student with a learning disability may not be the same evidence-based practice for a student with complex support needs or vice versa. However, there are evidence-based practices that could be for both of those students. So anyway, these are some key features right here. And then there are examples of places that you can look to identify and select evidence-based practices. So there's something called the What Works Clearinghouse, and they have, a bank of all. Here are all these practices that are out there that we've evaluated, and then they rank them, and they'll tell you which ones are evidence-based practices, and they will even rank them based on the strength of the evidence. There's also things like the National Center on Intensive Intervention. These are only examples of sources you can go to. You can look, actually, you could go on even Google Scholar and put in the evidence-based practice, the population you're addressing, and what skill you're looking at, and you can pull up research articles on it. You can also find them in the National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorder. So again, there are lots of places that you can go to identify and select evidence-based practices. And so let's look at a comparison. So, evidence-based practices are practices that have high quality research. There is proof that has demonstrated, there are studies, research that have demonstrated that it is effective, and that research is rigorous. Now, that's very different than something that somebody might consider best practices, because sometimes best practices are not backed by research. It could be for some students, but not for everybody. Sometimes best practices are based on a trend, like somebody started, they did a couple of TikToks, some more people did TikToks, some more people did TikToks, and there's no research to back it up, but there's a trend with that practice. It could be based on people's opinion. Hey, this worked for me, or hey, I like this. This is easy to implement. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's evidence-based. It could just be something that's popular. And so with evidence-based practices, point this out because we're going to talk about this came out of the IRIS module, but I'm just doing a quick review on it, is that we're going to talk about the characteristics of different types of practices. And again, this is a good resource because I put it together all in one space, all in one spot. So an evidence-based practice has strong research support, it has positive impact on student outcomes, and there are multiple high-quality studies. Then there are things called promising practices. Now, these have some positive early results. There is some research that's been done on it, and there have been some positive results, but more research is needed. I do research on writing for students with complex support needs, and we have a practice, an intervention that's a promising practice right now. We've had lots of early positive results, but we need more research teams, more geographic locations before it can be identified as an evidence-based practice. It is a promising practice. Then there are research-based practices. These have some research, but some of the evidence might be good, some of it might be some of it might be okay. So it has mixed evidence as far as the results. So it might be that in this research, it showed that it had a really high impact on student learning. The next one, it had a moderate impact, or it had a high impact on some of the students in the studies, but not on all of them. So research-based practice. And then there is an emerging practice. And this is something that there's only anecdotal information on the evidence. There's not research to back it up, or that research is very limited. So we are always, always, always shooting for that evidence-based practice. However, if there isn't an evidence-based practice, we would slowly start moving down the table. We would move to looking for a promising practice. Because, for example, right now, for writing for students with complex support needs, there are no identified evidence-based practices. That's why I do the research that I do. All right, so when you're selecting an evidence-based practice, there are a couple of things that you want to do. You want to identify the skill or the behavior. This is what I'm going to identify an evidence-based practice because this is what I want to teach my student. Then you're going to find an evidence-based practice that is used to teach that skill. And again, I told you a couple different places that you can look. You could also, again, go to Google Scholar and look that up. Here is a wonderful place to look for evidence-based practice is our library. So you can actually look at the research, and you can do it again through Google Scholar or through our university library, and you can look for research that has strong supporting evidence for the practice that you're considering using. You could choose a practice that fits the student's needs, that fits your classroom or your available resources. Because sometimes there may be an evidence-based practice, but you don't currently have the resources in order to implement that. For example, I often teach writing using a writing app called Go Right Now. Go Talk Now. Go Right is another app called Go Talk Now, and you may not have access to an iPad, and an iPad is needed in order to use that app. You also want to make a plan for how you're going to teach it, and then you're going to practice, and you're going to deliver that evidence-based practice with fidelity consistently, and you're going to make sure that you're doing it correctly. That's what I mean by implementing with fidelity. You're implementing it the way it was intended. So there are some benefits of using evidence-based practices. Star. It improves student outcomes. It's supported by research and by data. It's more likely that it will meet your students' needs because, again, research has been done using this and it's proven or demonstrated to be effective. Not only that, when you use evidence-based practice, it saves your time and it saves resources because you're not just engaging in trial and error to try to figure out how to teach it. Here is a practice, an instructional strategy that has shown to be effective. Evidence-based practice have shown to improve academic and behavioral skills. So students are having success in those areas when evidence-based practices are used. So when you think about the benefits of evidence-based practice, it makes your instruction more effective. That's huge. Your instruction is more effective. Students learn more efficiently. They can learn skills more quickly. There's less trial and error. Student outcomes improve, and that is what we all want. That is our goal. That is what we do, why we do what we do. And on a selfish, self-centered, looking at yourself level, you will be happier and you will enjoy your job more because once you know how to implement those evidence-based practices, you can say, I'm teaching, for example, I'll give you an example. If I am teaching, sight word reading using constant time delay, number identification using constant time delay. I know how to implement that. I can implement it really efficiently and effectively. So again, evidence-based practices have lots of benefits. And if it improves student learning and it makes you happier and makes your job easier, you want to make sure you're using those. Look at that. Love, love, love evidence-based practices. All right, so number 10, will you use evidence-based practices in your classroom? Why or why not? Go ahead and put that on your participation document. Stop the video, and I'll see you in a second to wrap up this week's lessons. All right, welcome back. We are at the end, my friend. So let's do a quick check of your understanding. How are you feeling about the content that we just covered? Make sure that the last thing you have on your participation document is questions and list any questions you have there. If you don't have any questions because you understand this week's content, please put that too so that I know you're not just skipping that part of the assignment. All right, I will see you all in class. I look forward to taking what we've learned and applying it in the classroom. And I will see you then.